Good afternoon and welcome to the Willamette Women Democrats. My name is Veronica Williams and I have the honor to serve as the president of W2D. We have an outstanding program for you today and I'm very glad that you could join us. Before I make a few remarks, several housekeeping matters. If you have joined us, we have muted your speakers and turned off your videos. We do this to improve the overall quality of the transmission of the program and to help ensure that our speakers will not be interrupted by accidental noises at your end. So unless I specifically call on you or during introductions, please do stay muted and with your videos off. Please feel free to put any questions for our speakers in the chat. After their remarks, we will be introducing elected officials and any candidates in the room, and then we will get to your questions. While the November 2020 election seems like just yesterday, it is in fact 2021, and this May we will have an election. Running will be candidates for school board, the PCC board, and special districts, parks, fire, water districts. Turnout for these off-year May elections can be horrible, averaging 20% or so. I know this Zoom room is full of former teachers, parents who have been active or continue to be active in their children's or local schools, and employers who are always looking for high-quality employees. These elections are important and your vote matters. So please pay attention and follow the elections in your community. Watch for an email from W2D with our list of important candidates and races. And please remind your friends and neighbors of the importance of voting in May. Across the country in many states, legislatures are working overtime to make it difficult for people to vote. Here in Oregon, we make it easy and we are fortunate. Let's not take this for granted. Let's remember our responsibility as citizens. Ballots will be in the mail beginning April 28th. So please be sure to vote and please vote early. And now I would like to turn it over to our board member and program chair, Nancy Murray, to introduce our guest speakers. Nancy?
Good afternoon. We are waiting for Senator Jeff Golden to join us. So I will first introduce Meredith Connolly, and then I will introduce Senator Golden when he is able to join us. So first, good afternoon. Meredith Connolly is the Oregon Director of Climate Solutions, an organization that advocates climate policies in the Northwest to all audiences, all levels of government, the private sector, and in our communities. She brings over a decade of climate policy experience to her work, supporting Oregon's transition to a clean energy economy. She advocates for innovative and equitable policy solutions to reduce pollution and create clean energy jobs across the state. Currently, Meredith leads a team diligently working to electrify everything from cars, trucks, and buses to homes and buildings, and power it all with 100% clean energy, clean electricity. Previously, as a climate and energy attorney for the National Resources Defense Council, NRDC, she advances renewable energy policies in the US. Internationally, she worked for the NRDC to implement programs in India's growing cities, to protect public health and improve climate resilience to heat waves and air pollution. Meredith holds a Bachelor of Science degrees in political science and French from Santa Clara University and a JD from Boston College Law School. In her free time, Meredith enjoys exploring her incredible home state of Oregon with her young family and is a huge fan of the Portland Thorns and Timbers. So welcome, Meredith.
Excuse me, Meredith, I think you're muted just a moment.
Well, thank you so much, Nancy. That was a very kind introduction. I appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to speaking with you all this evening about an issue that is my passion and focus. And there's a lot to be done and a lot to unpack on where Oregon's at and what we can do. I have a PowerPoint that I think I'm a visual learner. I'd love to walk through some of it. There's more material than we'll go through in the PowerPoint, but I'd like to kind of hone in on where Oregon's at and what that means we really need to do and where those biggest opportunities are to move the needle this session. And then just really open it up because I have a feeling the questions will be more interesting than the kind of initial groundwork I can put out there. So let me see if I can share my screen and get started on that. And can everyone see this? Just want to confirm people can see my screen.
It's fine, thank you. Yes.
Okay, good, thank you. Okay, then I will get started. And I'd had a preliminary conversation with Nancy about the presentation, and she said everyone will know this slide or this information, which is amazing because you're deeper into this than unfortunately some of our elected officials and many others. So the quick hit is this is a pretty common visual we've started to see now of where are the climate pollution levels in Oregon. And that's really where you see the level of where we're at now. And then where is it projected to go under business as usual? That's this red dotted line. What we know to get to safe levels of climate pollution in our atmosphere, and for Oregon to do its fair share of what every state, every city, and then every country needs to do, that's really those Paris goals that match up somewhat well with our state goals, the gold kind of declining line there. So as you can see, business as usual, even with the policies we have that will reduce some emissions on the books, we're nowhere near where we need to go. We need dramatically more action. This also has kind of by sector where the most emissions are coming from, and that will tie quite nicely to, from an energy perspective, where we need to reduce emissions. I focus on energy. That means our electricity sector, our buildings, and our transportation sector. If Senator Golden is able to join us and share his knowledge, he's very focused in the natural resources and forestry and ag sectors, and those have huge roles to play as well. I won't stay on this very long, but I think sometimes this conversation can feel a little academic, and it's important to remind everyone how real it is and how many impacts we're already feeling here in Oregon, and what that means our future is if we don't make big changes now. There's a lot of smart analysis that has shown us basically the pathway of how to get there. So how to get from what we saw as business as usual down. And what it really means is we need to get to 100% clean electricity. We can't use fossil fuels on our electricity grid. And then we need to move as much uses as possible to that electricity grid. So especially electrify our transportation systems, our buildings, and industry as much as possible. Use cleaner fuels for those things we can electrify. And I will get into the specifics of that with Oregon here and how it ties into some of the bills we're working on in the legislature right now. They fit into these buckets, which you've already heard: 100% clean electricity, clean and efficient buildings, clean transportation, and then ensuring this is a just transition, because even as we get there, we need to make sure we're baking in equitable policies and impacts, taking care of our workforce, and making sure that we're creating good quality jobs in that 21st century clean energy economy that we hope these policies will lead to. So one of the big focuses here, and I have a lot of bills here because, you know, I believe most of you, since it sounds like I'm talking to a very politically engaged audience, I'll say probably witnessed what I had a front row seat to of the walkouts over the climate bills the past few years. You know, that was an attempt to pass a economy-wide climate policy. What you see a pivot to this year is really a focus on how do we clean up and move forward each sector, and how do we do it in a way that really looks at the point we're at right now on the need to really build back better and more sustainably, and take into account, you know, reinvigorating our economy, getting people back to work, and make sure that it's right sized for the moment Oregon finds itself in, recovering from COVID, economic fallout, and wildfires. So one of the banner policies we think is 100% clean electricity. The bill is HB 2021. And there's a few reasons Oregon should adopt this policy. This slide has two of those reasons on them. One is that without this policy in place, we have coal to clean policy that passed in 2016. My organization and others worked on that. The thing that it did do is have all coal in our electricity mix be on track to retire by the end of 2030 and get us to 50% of our electric grid be powered by renewable energy. However, it didn't directly address fossil gas plants in our grid. And what we're seeing is actually a dramatic growth of the amount of fossil gas Oregon uses in our electricity sector. So we need a new North Star, a policy that starts planning for the next 2 decades. How do we transition off of all the gas that we use in our electric system as well, and replace that with wind and solar, storage, smarter transition, regional grids, energy efficiency, all of those tools. And so this is a statistic from our Oregon Department of Energy showing just between 2012 and 2018, how much gas grew in our system. That number has increased since then. You can see we start with a clean hydro, carbon-free hydro foundation, but we don't use a lot of renewables yet for the rest. The other reason would be that we've actually fallen behind here. After we passed coal to clean, states have really accelerated their adoption of 100% clean electricity policies. You can see us, it was mentioned in my bio, I am a Thorns and Timbers fan. I am very competitive and proud of Oregon, and I hate seeing us miss out on this slide here. We need to join the rest of the region in doing this, and it should be a less scary policy because we're not the first, unfortunately. What would be exciting is we could be going to 100% clean faster than our West Coast peers, and piggybacking and putting pressure on everyone to accelerate those timelines. Our bill gets us there by 2040, and we have gotten agreement with PacifiCorp and Portland General that they can achieve that target, and they support the bill now. So that's a very encouraging development there. It also has good labor standards in the bill. It has pathways for community renewable energy to be built. We want to look at how do we have, you know, our wildfire communities and others be able to benefit from the resiliency and other benefits of clean energy as well. And then it also says no new gas plants can be sited in Oregon. So it draws a line that we're moving off of gas, and that would send a very strong signal nationally, we think, with the national conversation around a clean energy standard. So that is one of the big bills I wanted to focus on, and I'm happy to answer questions in the chat afterwards about it. But I want to say, you know, as we clean up our grid, the other big focus is how do we move as much as possible to that clean grid? And transportation electrification is something Climate Solutions focuses on quite a bit. Transportation is our biggest sector of source of pollution in Oregon. It has been growing. While EVs are starting to have a zeitgeist moment, and I think we will see a lot of increase in EV sales, we're still at 1 to 2% penetration. So the numbers that we have to reach quite quickly will take a lot of policy to support. We need a lot of charging infrastructure to be built, and there's a chicken or egg of how many people have EVs versus how much charging you build, and that gives people comfort to buy an EV because they know they can charge it, they know they can get around on it. And that's not going to happen in a way that is really equitable and reaching low-income communities and rural communities without policies that really direct that investment and ensure it happens. The other thing I will say is that we don't have bills focused on this session, but we are working with DEQ and regulators on, and will be a focus of future bills, is really our medium and heavy duty sector. How do we electrify those much more quickly? Because the air pollution impacts of those, especially for Black and Indigenous and people of color communities, is enormous. And you know, there are electric alternatives to diesel trucks being built on Swan Island by Daimler. We want those on Oregon roads, displacing diesel trucks. Electric school buses and electric transit buses, TriMet and others are a big focus for us. The bills that are moving in the clean transportation space are listed here. I would focus on HB 2165. We have EV incentives right now that looks like cash on the hood. It knocks a few $1,000s off the price of an EV. It is, there is a program of it called the Charge Ahead program that is for low-income Oregonians, and it doubles the amount of EV incentive you get. And you can also use it to buy a used electric vehicle, and it covers most of the cost of the vehicle at that point. Used EV Leafs are being sold for about $7,000 in Oregon. This would be for $5,000. It also says the electric utilities need to be installing more EV charging infrastructure, and it directs half of what they invest to go to BIPOC communities, low-income communities, or benefit those communities. And what that can look like is, how do we make sure EV charging is happening near and enabling those who live in apartments and multifamily housing, who don't have their own garage to charge in? How do we make sure there are public charging pods? How do we make sure, again, there's charging for transit and electric trucks and other things that will reduce pollution? This bill will help do those things. So we're quite excited about that. It is in the Joint Transportation Committee right now. There's also a bill to make sure as we build out our new buildings, we're building them to be plumbed and ready for electric vehicles charging, because that cuts down a big barrier to adopting it later. Finally, I will just mention a growing focus for us is about the built environment. We have focused a lot on energy efficient building codes in the past. That is still a focus. And there is a bill right now to enable cities to require everyone in their city to build more energy efficiently than the state building code. That's that HB 2398. But we're also looking at how do we ensure that there's a holistic look equitably at when we invest in and weatherize homes, let's make sure we're taking out the mold and making sure that these homes are actually healthy, not just increasing insulation. And that's the Healthy Homes bill that environmental justice organizations have brought this year, and we wholeheartedly support. We frankly also, it's time for buildings to start moving off of fossil gas used for their heating and move to electric. And there is not a bill to do that this year, but that is a major conversation happening in cities looking at their city climate action plans, saying, how am I going to achieve this? You know, we need to stop expanding gas every year. We need to take that seriously. And that will be, you know, we've seen the city of Seattle and many cities across the West Coast and across the country are starting to pass ordinances banning new buildings being built with gas. So I would say that's coming, but hasn't come yet to Oregon. There are more reasons to talk about there. I think one thing that I found shocking as a mom was that there are now new studies about cooking with gas and the combustion of it and the indoor air quality impacts. They're seeing much higher rates of asthma in kids. with kids. And I think there's a lot of information that is going to start looking the way it did with the secondhand use of smoking with gas in buildings that is starting to come out. So I think that's a watch this space in the climate world for how we equitably transition to all electric buildings. I will just wrap by mentioning there are some very important bills about making sure energy bills stay low and stable for low-income Oregonians. As we go through this clean energy transition, we want to make sure that happens. And so that bill is here. And then also about our land use and who gets to role in deciding where industry is sited or other things like that. And so those are two critical bills moving this session as well that we're very excited to see. I will stop there with this very scary picture of the Capitol during the wildfires, just to light a fire under the importance of this conversation. So I will turn this off now so I can see everyone, and Nancy or someone, however, if Senator Golden's joined us or not, I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much, Meredith. And yes, I believe the senator is on, and
Oh, there he is.
have you, and we will, let's see.
Can I introduce Senator Golden?
Yes, please, and then he can unmute himself. Here we go.
Yep.
Excellent. Go ahead.
Yep, finally. Yeah, hi.
Hi, we have Senator Golden on the move from Medford. So I have a great pleasure in introducing him. What an interesting person. Senator Jeff Golden represents a district in Southern Oregon devastated by wildfires in 2020. Today, he serves on the new subcommittee working with state agencies, FEMA, and affected counties to support the recovery of Oregonians who lost homes and businesses in the wildfires. He has led an extraordinarily interesting life that includes going from high school in Beverly Hills to entering Harvard as a national scholar, becoming an anti-war activist, then volunteering at a sharecropper's farm in Southwest Georgia that led him to try sustainable living on a plot of land in rural Southern Oregon that he chronicled in his first published book, Watermelon Summer, a Journal. Senator Golden has also been a river guide, as well as featured in a film about a group of 17 who rafted down the Colorado River for a month. Stanford University accepted Jeff into its broadcast communications master's program, an education he put to good use, hosting the Jefferson Exchange for 10 years, a popular daily NPR talk show on a network of Northwest stations. He also created the TV program Immense Possibilities, carried by 25 PBS stations around the country today. That includes PBS, I think. In addition to broadcasting, OPB, Jeff continued writing books, including a novel about the Northwest Timber Wars. His political career includes a term as Jefferson County Commissioner at the time of the Spotted Owl controversy, Chief of Staff to then Senate President Bill Bradbury, an environmental policy aide to the city of Portland, and now, of course, State Senator representing Ashland and the surrounding district. And I'm worn out just reading all of that. So welcome, Senator. And I'm so glad you were able to join us en route.
Thank you so much. Most of that is true. One teeny detail is it was Jackson County Commissioner, not Jefferson. That was where I've been in the Rogue Valley ever since I got to Oregon. And that's what I still, but everything else was on the nose. And I think more than my mother ever knew about me. So thank you for that. Can you hear and see me okay?
Yes, fine.
I'm at the I-5 rest stop just north of Sutherland on my way from the week in Salem on my way back to the district. And the first thing I want to say is how much I appreciate Meredith and Climate Solutions and the work they've been doing, how well they keep us focused on the importance and the practical routes to getting there. now that, and I like tag teaming with her on this, now that she's given you kind of facts and reality, I get to talk about politics. Let me just tell you a little bit of my trail. I am actually not working on those energy bills this session, to my surprise. I'm cheering them on. But what I was to have had the committee to deal with these bills. I was elected in 2018, and in 2019 became chair of a new wildfire policy committee. And then for this session was asked to chair a natural resources and environment committee, which is sort of everything you can think of that relates to natural resources and the environment. And that felt a little heavy given the general wildfire picture and all that needs to be done, and the energy picture, and picking up the pieces after the climate bill collapsed in 2019 and 2020. And then the 2020 wildfires happened. And at that point, the Senate president said, let's split this into two committees. So now I chair the Senate Natural Resources and Wildfire Recovery Committee, and there is a separate Energy and Environment Committee chaired by Lee Beyer, and its primary and I think most knowledgeable member is Senator Dembro, who has, of course, been on the beat for a long time on this and doing really, really good work. The 2019 and 2020 sessions were character building in terms of the climate politics. Meredith talked about it a little bit, and I won't go back to it, but what made it so difficult in part was the effort to do this, as Meredith was saying, economy-wide, as California did. California is the only state that has done that. And by that, we mean addressing all three of the major emissions sectors. So electricity generation and industrial emissions and transportation. Only California has a program to deal with all of them. And in the end, it became the challenge with that is there's so many moving parts and so many complexities that it's a little hard to explain to people. And to be very frank, it's very vulnerable to misrepresentation, which happened daily in 2019 and 2020 as we were trying to pass those bills. So the focus this session, as Meredith's already described, is on one of those sectors, electricity generation. That's more straightforward. It has the advantage that the major industrial players are not lined up against them. Some of them are lined up with us, and it already fits their long-term business plans. The different utilities have different situations there. And earlier legislation like Coal to Clean and the renewable portfolio set standards of past sessions already kind of have us on that path, have us well positioned. So I'm optimistic we're going to get a bill out this time. The Republicans who've walked out in the past seem to have less to work with to frighten Oregonians about how much it's going to increase their living costs, and that's a good thing. One of the things we've lost in losing the big climate bill is a source of considerable revenue to help make an energy transition. You know, the whole concept of the clean energy jobs bills was to generate enough revenue to do a number of things. One is to protect economically vulnerable people from cost increases, but also smart strategic investment in clean energy and good jobs. That absolutely would have happened, and we now don't have that revenue source. And I'm thinking about it in terms of wildfire now, because California has invested $1 billion in wildfire policy, and some of that is from their climate fund. We don't have that. Tomorrow we'll be in public hearing on our wildfire omnibus bill, and it's priced at somewhere in the $150 million range, which isn't as much as we'd like, but we don't have a ready source of revenue for that. We're going to have to struggle within the general fund for that money. So when you give up the approach we're trying to take in 2019 and 2020, you are hard put for revenue on the scale you want for energy transition, and other purposes. So my work this session is really taken up with two major wildfire bills. Meredith made reference to one of them. It's the wildfire recovery bill from the 2020 wildfires. And the lead on that is in the House. There is a House committee that is only doing wildfire recovery. And we're working with them daily to come to a unified bill. And there's a little bit of politics involved, but mostly it's a budget making process. We're going to be spending, on the order of $300 or $400 million, which is inadequate to the need, but we'll be leveraging FEMA dollars and other federal dollars. And there's going to be some push and pull about, which regions need it the most. My district, the Alameda fire, had by far the most destruction to homes and improvements in infrastructure. But there are other places that need help too, especially the Santiam Canyon fire. So I'm optimistic that we're going to have a good outcome with that, and just wish that we had some more funding. The other bill is more complicated. It's the one that's taking most of my time. It's an omnibus wildfire policy bill, and its antecedent was the Governor's Wildfire Council of 2019, which then became a major omnibus bill last session, 2020, which died with just about everything else in the Republican walkouts. And basically, the structure all along is we have three prongs to this. One is response, suppression of fires, and having the right kind of resources and the right kind of people and the right kind of places to do that. One is what's generally called mitigation, which you can think of as fuel reduction and other kinds of forest resiliency and forest health projects to reduce the amount of fuels and flammability of these fires. And one is community adaptation, which is the whole bucket of zoning and building code and defensible space and hardening, clear spaces around homes, evacuation planning, alerts, that kind of thing. And that one is the most difficult of them because it runs into property rights issues and whether we're going to, did I lose my video? Are you not seeing me? Let me.
Yeah, you're going in and out.
Let me see if I can do something about that. See me now? Yeah.
Yes, you're back.
So we're embroiled in some struggles with realtor groups and development groups and home builders and the Farm Bureau and the Forest Industries Council about what needs to be mandatory in this new age of mega fires, and we are not done with them. We now have drought declared earlier than ever before in my county and Klamath County. And we have a climate issue. It got a little old in the last few years, even before the 2020 fires, to hear this debate about whether this was the result, our mega fires, a result of climate change or forest practices. And when people said forest practices, they argued about which forest practices. And clearly, at least to me, it's both. And we have the accumulated fuel of half a century of Smokey the Bear over suppression that interrupted the natural cycle where periodic fires burned through areas, brought down the fuels. And of course, the native peoples knew this very well and managed the West very well with fires. We've let those fuels accumulate, and that's a huge part of the problem. And then our forests are drier and have more very hot days every summer, almost in a linear way. And, as regards the topic of today's meeting, we could execute our forest strategy, forest fire reduction strategy perfectly and brilliantly, and we won't. But even if we did, we wouldn't deal with the problem adequately unless we can turn the trend on climate. We have to remember that at every turn. So we have some struggles in terms of, I would say, private property rights and development rights. It's a little bit like how much development are you going to allow in New Orleans and the floodplains areas? How many times do we need to learn this lesson? And there's a lot of money and a lot of business groups engaged. And the other part that's difficult is I called mitigation and forest reduction, or pardon me, fuel reduction. Probably a Freudian slip there, because there's a real argument in the scientific community about how much of this fuel reduction we should be doing. And there's a history, one chapter of the Timber Wars was the use of an excuse of fire risk reduction to go in after older growth timber and undisturbed lands that are not part of our wildfire problem. You may remember the second President Bush's Healthy Forests program, which, in my judgment, was quite a cynical use of fear of wildfire to go after timber that couldn't be accessed any other way. And the environmental community remembers that, and they're watching this bill very carefully to see where it is we want to reduce fuels. We're going to do it right up again in the edges of what's called the WUI, the Wildland Urban Interface. We have projects aligned with the bill that are along the lines of the South Hills of Eugene, where the Northwest Youth Corps has done a great job in the close-in work. We want to do more funding of that, which has the ancillary benefit of developing career paths for younger people in the woods, because forest restoration has to be an industry. Maybe we can figure out how the private sector can get involved. It's starting to a little bit. It is in the climate context, if you allow carbon sequestration to be a valuable commodity that can monetize good, responsible forest management that's not as extractive. So that's another way in which all this fits together. So the two, I'm really quite engaged right now, because tomorrow is our big public hearing, and then Monday we'll be passing the bill out of committee. Tuesday is what's called the first chamber deadline. And with some exceptions, any bill that hasn't passed out of the policy committee, either on the House or Senate side, is dead for the session after Tuesdays. There are a couple committees like Ways and Means that are accepted from that. So I'm kind of living this, breathing this 24/7 right now. But we've got an enormous task in front of us figuring this out. We've got to, one example I will offer before stopping for some interaction here is prescribed burning. In order to reduce the fuel loads in a way that we can conceivably afford, we have to go back to some of the indigenous practices of purposeful strategic fire on the landscape. And that used to be easier than it is now. If you talk to managers, national forest supervisors, and other professionals, they will tell you this was easier 20 years ago, but now we have less confidence about controlling fires. We can get 20 years ago, we'd get a lightning strike and we'd say, let's let it burn this sector. It's not going to be a problem. And we'll reduce a lot of fuels that way. Now, with how dry the forests are and the kind of wind generation we've got, all climate results, all climate chaos examples, those managers are less sure that they can control those fires. And some of the mega fires of the last 3 or 4 years have started as controlled burns, and managers said, let's let that burn for a while. And it got away from them. So that's one of the huge dilemmas we have facing us that we might not have had we gotten serious about climate a lot earlier. So let me stop there with my thanks for being invited here and see if I can participate in a conversation before heading down the road.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate it. And before we get to the questions, and I know there's been some talk back and forth in the chat, but I probably will re-ask some of those questions while we're at it. I do want to recognize some people that we do have with us on the call who are elected officials. I think I have everybody, but there's a few people who are on phone. So if you are an elected official and I miss you, drop me a note in the chat and I will be sure to recognize you. I want to welcome Metro Councilor Christine Lewis, I'd like to welcome Tualatin City Councilor Bridget Brooks and Tualatin City Councilor Valerie Pratt. And I'd like to welcome West Multnomah Soil and Conservation District Director Terry Prieg-Rigsby. So thank you all for joining us. And now we'll get on to some of the questions. So let me pull things up a bit in the chat here. So one question, I think this is probably for Meredith. It says, does EV incentives cover delivery vans? There seems to be, this seems to be a hot area for delivery van manufacturers. And we're certainly seeing a lot of Amazon vans flying around my neighborhood. Meredith, we need to unmute you. There you go. Okay.
Sorry about that. I have young kiddos. So I was trying to stay muted when not talking, but I'll stay unmuted the rest of the time. Okay. Yeah, that's a really good question. The EV incentive bill that I mentioned is just for passenger vehicles, individuals, cars. But we actually have seen a lot of requests and desires and energy for, it's a pretty small pot of money. It's 12 million a year that goes to these EV incentives, and about half of them go to the Charge Ahead program with the new and used cars for low-income families. We need to have more money to do incentives for these other types of vehicles. One interesting thing that we're seeing is the first electric tractors in Oregon. And those are just on the first farms being piloted. That's quite exciting to see. And we've already seen some requests for how do we incentivize and buy down the upfront costs of those. On delivery vans, Amazon has made an internal commitment to electrify their fleet. It will probably take that kind of incentive program to do that for a FedEx and other delivery vehicles too. And you know, I was actually happy to see, I saw an email from DeFazio, Congressman DeFazio today about electrifying the Postal Service. I think we really need to take a look at all of these different kinds of fleets and figure out where we can electrify. How do we stop investing in new diesel or you know, internal combustion engine vehicles, and where do we start replacing those as quickly as possible with the electric alternatives that are coming?
Okay, we also have a question about, does our electric grid have adequate capacity for all this extra demand to fuel automobiles?
Yeah, that's a very good question. You know, the answer I would give is the utilities are planning for a lot of this increased load. They are planning for the transportation system and a lot of buildings to start coming onto the grid. It is a part of the conversation with going to 100% clean is, you know, let's give as long a runway and as much planning as possible to get there. So the answer is yes, but it needs to be planned for. It needs to be a planned transition, but it is definitely possible.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to get a question in here for the senator. Does the current proposed legislation provide fire mitigation as a goal to help protect homes which border state forest land and have no fire clearance? Our questioner has a road that borders the state forest land, which is managed by Metro, and which up until now will not consider building a clearance or defensible area. They were just worried about, so how's that work?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. I'm not sure I have a good answer for that. That sounds a little complex in terms of jurisdictions. I do know that, you know, that it sounds like it would very much be identified as WUI, Wildland Urban Interface. And on the mapping we're doing, core to this bill is a unified fire risk map that isn't quite done. It's going to spend, and all of this takes longer than I think it should, but it'll be done in about 16 months, and it will drive where fuel reduction happens. So from the sound of it, this property would be either high or extreme risk and would be eligible for monies from this bill, either through state forestry or if it's really close in, if we're really talking very close to homes, through what we're calling the Oregon Wildfire Corps, which is the program for younger people, jobs in the woods that I was talking about before. There's also a portion of the bill that calls for grant money, and we can get probably a federal match to homeowners, to landowners in small woodland lots to help reduce fuel, to help shoulder the cost of fuel reduction. So that would be the landowner themselves who would, at least on their own property, take care of it. And then across the line, if it were state forest and if it were in the extreme risk zone, I'm almost certain this bill could cover it.
Okay. Back to you, Meredith. And this is pretty complicated, so I hope I can spit it out properly. Is renewable green diesel, not biofuels, a sufficiently realistic alternative that we should be investing in more plants to produce in Oregon? Is this a direct alternative to diesel with no needed alterations? Is it a way to consider to counter the opposition to diesel phase out?
That's a really good question. So the 2 seconds on the difference between all those for folks who don't live and breathe different clean fuels. There are many ways to make alternative fuels to replace or just to blend in and reduce the emissions of diesel and gasoline. As it's called here, green diesel, I think what's being referred to is like renewable diesel, sometimes called like an R99. That is actually where they take excess fats, oils, greases, others, excess things like that, and turn it into a full replacement of diesel. And so, yes, it is a drop-in fuel, so you can use it in an existing engine and it runs the same as diesel, except it doesn't use any fossil fuels or petroleum. And it burns cleaner. We've heard it has lower maintenance. It's gentler on the equipment, and it can be sold because of our clean fuels program that we have. It's actually almost identical in cost, just a penny or two more at the rack where you buy your diesel in Portland. So I have talked to some fleets who are using it now, some freight companies, and they have very good things to say about it. And I think it's a wonderful replacement that you could do tomorrow to reduce your emissions. I think it can't stop there. You know, we can't replace all the diesel on the road with renewable diesel. So it's a great drop-in fuel while we keep working toward electrifying our fleets down the road, building out the infrastructure, getting the costs down, starting to get fleets to electrify. Another example that comes to mind for me is TriMet. And I'm not just saying this for you, Councillor Lewis, since you're on the call, but you know, TriMet is the biggest user of diesel in the state of Oregon. They have a commitment to electrify. They don't, you know, this COVID has really hit transit budgets quite hard. Being able to use renewable diesel to in their existing fleet of buses would clean the air and have a much smaller climate impact while they are working toward their electrification goals, which will take right now 2 decades.
Okay, thank you. So we have a lot of questions going on in the chat. I think we can keep you busy all day. So there's a question about if anything will be done regarding mandating non-leaded gas in airplanes, particularly from small airports and old private planes.
I have not followed any legislation on that. You know, I hope so. I have not heard of that legislation coming up though.
Okay. Senator Golden, I don't know how much you spoke about changes in building codes, and I actually have a somewhat related question to that. It kind of came to my attention that a number of people, especially down in your area, the Talent Fires, Phoenix area, are having very difficult times with FEMA, getting FEMA to honor their claims, especially when they live in manufactured homes or mobile homes, however one wants to phrase it, because there's issues of proof of ownership, etc. And I'm just wondering, most of us that live in stick-built houses are very used to having title and all the complexities of when you purchase a home and the 10 tons of paperwork to make it very clear as to who has title to the home. And apparently this is not how many transactions related to manufactured homes occurs. So I'm just wondering if there's any of those issues are coming up in front of your committees in terms of changing those rules, and also if there's any other building code changes specifically that are starting to be discussed.
So yes, on building code changes, our bill adopts the international WUI Wildland Urban Interface codes, which have been adopted by all other Western states. And this is where some of the home builders and realtors have heartburn talking about how they will increase the price of building and that runs against our affordable housing goals. I actually think that's really overblown anymore. It used to be more true than it was. And we'll have a set, I mentioned the map before, it will have an extreme risk zone across the state and a high risk zone. And there will probably be 2 levels of building code for each of those that are different from the standard code. Now you open a large can of worms when you get into the mobile home and trailer world. Really, of the homes, we lost about 2,500 units in Jackson County on Labor Day. And about 1,800 of those were in mobile home parks. And they ranged from rather nice manufactured homes to really old trailers. And, there's a lot of tragic details about that fire. That was our naturally occurring affordable housing. There were 18 parks that were destroyed. And our largely Latinx workforce was in a lot of those parks, and a lot of them are gone, have left the area for good. And we're going to feel the effect of that for a long time. But those folks trying to get, a lot of them were uninsured. A lot of them are struggling with insurance companies because they didn't dot the right I and cross the right T. FEMA has tried to be helpful, but they have a ridiculously difficult, somewhat difficult application process. And people are rejected for little tiny mistakes on an application. And that, FEMA says, please, if you get rejected, reapply. Well, a lot of those people are not English speaking. A lot of them are just, not going to spend a lot of time with an application. One thing we're doing right now is deploying some navigators to help people who've lost their homes deal with FEMA and other red tape. And a lot of those, we secured $25 million for property acquisition in that strip, what's called the Highway 99 corridor between Medford and Ashland, where the parks burned down, because we've got a lot of very viable ideas for replacing those homes, not with manufactured units, but with kind of new model villages and tiny home villages, cooperatively owned cottage configurations, really cost effective and energy efficient, potentially, settlements that are quite dense, that are going to serve people better than those 1960s trailers would. And it's really a matter of, we have to acquire the property and get that in private instead of speculative ownership to deploy some of these ideas. There's exciting things happening with tenant-owned cooperatives in some of these parks. There's one like that in Oregon already, and a few across the country. we've got the ideas, we've got the pilots already figured out. We need to acquire property and be able to take the speculative element out in order for this to be affordable and cost effective. So I'm hoping in this wildfire recovery bill, I'm hoping for more money for property acquisition.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I just have one last question for you, Meredith. It's a great question to end the session with, and that is, what are the top 3 steps every household should take to make a daily contribution to reduce emissions and to support clean energy? You got
Wow.
top 3?
I love that. Okay. Well, I'll give you a few and you can choose your top 3. I think voting and a strong democracy that can pass action and have our elected officials be able to do the big things on climate is honestly the biggest thing everyone can and must do. And
like staying in the building and voting?
Stay in the building, vote, have a functioning legislature. You know, I think elected officials hearing that you care about climate, this is important to you, and what are they doing is actually quite important, because as you can tell, hearing from Senator Golden, there will always be crises that we're responding to. And what we're seeing is we're living in the era of multiple crises now. And I unfortunately think that will continue. So we're recovering from the wildfires, and now we've had this epic ice storm. Climate crises are not going away, they will multiply. Pandemics, unfortunately, will increase. I'm not very popular at dinner parties. I won't start talking about climate change right now, but my point is just, there are things we could do now that actually make our communities more livable, more resilient, more affordable, and more sustainable. And there are solutions at hand. We know what they are, but they have to be prioritized by our elected officials. They need to hear about them. I'll tell you my bucket list, which is I try to not drive when I can't. I try to use public transportation or walk or bike when I can. But I also have young children, and a lot of people have a lot of reasons they need to drive. I am saving up for my first electric vehicle. I think that is a huge thing everyone can do. And I did just switch out my gas stove for an electric induction stove. I love it. I have not electrified my home fully. I'm going appliance by appliance as I can afford it, but that would be another big thing that to start looking at electric heat pumps and electric water heaters. And then, you know, I think there are a lot of these, again, are very holistic solutions we can look at. Multnomah County, for example, I think is looking at right now, as we all just passed, supported this big library bond. They're looking at now building their new library to be fossil free, use electric, but also use solar and storage so that it can be a resilient place for the community if for these, you know, disasters down the road. How do we create these microgrids and actually have it be a place that can get back online and everyone can gather around on the bad days and is healthier and meets our climate values on our good days. So there's quite a few things we can do. I hope that gives a little bit of inspiration at different levels.
That's great. And I do want to thank everybody for all the questions. And I know we didn't get to all of them, but we are running out of time. So I want to thank both Meredith Connolly and Senator Jeff Golden for your time and your ideas and letting us know what's happening. And we will keep watching. To all of our guests and regular attendees, I do want to invite you back in May. We have a very special guest. She is Ambassador Mary Carlin Yates. She is going to be chatting with us about how President Biden's first 100 days may indicate the direction his administration will be taking to rebuild our battered State Department and what the priorities and challenges diplomats are facing on the international stage with allies and adversaries. She has over 30 years in her career. She is now retired and back living in Oregon, but she's been posted in Korea, in the Philippines, in Zaire, Paris, Burundi, and Ghana, as well as a position on President Obama's National Security Council. She has worked with Nelson Mandela to broker peace between the Hutu and the Tutsi tribes people, as well as to negotiate among warring factions in Liberia. So we are very fortunate that she is here, and we are looking forward to having her in May when she shares her readings of the tea leaves for the foreign policies now taking shape. So thank you all very much for joining us. We'll see you in May, and enjoy our wonderful Oregon spring.
Thank you all very much. Please stay engaged.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Yeah, thank you.